So, welcome to this episode of Menopause Conversations. I am delighted to tell you that I've got an amazing guest with me today. Someone who we just started with a very interesting conversation, and as with most things, didn't know where it was going to lead. But I tell you where it led. It led to my wonderful guest, Dee Wilkinson, telling me about a book she's written, Creating Your Future After a Toxic Relationship. Now, that got me thinking. So I would like to introduce, well, I'm going to get Dee to introduce herself. Dee, it's an absolute joy to have you on this episode. Tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about this book, Creating Your Future After a Toxic Relationship.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's very exciting to be here. So yes, I'm Dee Wilkinson. I'm currently and have worked my way towards becoming a coach supervisor. I now have an MSc in coaching and development, and I specialise in coaching GPs. And I'm also exceptionally interested about managing your energy, not time, as the key to performance. And having been through something that exacerbated all my energy at once, I really recognize the value of how important having energy is, because we can have time, but actually if we can't bring energy to it, it's of no value. So that really matters to me. Very interested in neuroscience. So goodness, my background is working in the NHS health service. I did 22 years managing community hospitals and teams. And I brought coaching into NHS Devon back in around 2004. And consequently ended up setting up my own business, Southwest Coaching Limited. And I got into coaching from when I went into a community hospital that hadn't had some sort of consistent management for some time. But it very quickly turned my whole life around with unbelievable power. And that's when I became hooked on it and thought, my God, this is what people need to know about. So kind of that's a bit where I've come from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a real passion for the work that you do. I can see that. So this book, Futures After Toxic Relationships, I mean, what led you to writing that? Because it sounds like you discover this amazing concept around energy and stuff and in coaching. So what led to writing this book?
So I think what led to writing it was getting my life wrong, really, for quite a few number of years in various ways. And I experienced a domestically abusive relationship that I was in for about 16 years, and it was exceptionally hard to extract myself from that and the situation. And there's obviously a residual impact on myself and your family. But what occurred to me most was when you're going through something like that, you're just in it, you are in it because it's so all consuming. And then when I wasn't in it anymore, I recognized that I didn't have the future that I had in my mind and in my vision for the past 16 years. It had evaporated, gone, completely vanished. So I was kind of left, I hadn't even had time to contemplate what I was going to do with my life, who I was. Did I even like pink? I had no concept. I'd lost all sort of sense of self. And it took me a while to get my life back on track. But it was at the time, coincidentally, that I found coaching, which was just phenomenal. And it was like somebody giving me the steering wheel back to my life. And I suddenly recognized I had so much more control over how I wanted my life to be and what had led me into getting in such a muddle in the first place, if you like. But change takes a lot of time. And it was quite a while after this that I started to write the book, thinking if I could piece together the steps that I'd taken to create the future that I now had and had found, would that be helpful to other women or other men in my situation? Because there's so much written on domestic abuse and domestic violence in terms of help and support, which is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. But I couldn't find much for once you're out the other side. It was almost like everybody's efforts and energy went to getting you through it, which is amazing. But then once you're there, what next? What do you do? So I started to write it, put it on the shelf and left it for a few years. And then COVID hit and I was mortified by all the news flashes saying how domestic abuse, the incidents were rising. It was just really in the news for about 6 months. It was shocking. And so I thought, my God, I've got to get this out because it's really important now more than ever. There's going to be people that kind of need this. So I went back to it went to some publishers, amazingly, somebody said yes, and got the book together and got it out there. So I thought, right, if I've done one thing in my life that's helpful, that's it. I've done something positive. And then I was really, it was kind of a strange process, because I was thinking, well, how do I get it out there? So I went to Woman's Hour, I went to the BBC, because it was all so in the news. I thought, gosh, hello, I need this help. And not one person picked up on it. It was like, just dead in the water, which made me really sad. And I was curious at the time, thinking, is this about, people thinking it's self-promotion because you want to sell a book? And then how do you get around that? Because it's far from it. It's not about the self-promotion. The book earns me such a tiny amount, it's insignificant. It's the content. So I was left in a very strange place, thinking people need this, but how do you promote it without it looking like you're kind of self-promoting, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so important, isn't it? Because it is a huge issue. It's huge. And I'm just so surprised by that. And when you said that to me last time we were on a call, I said, well, we must do something about that. We must do something about that, because I think it would be helpful for people to understand what is a toxic relationship, because maybe people don't actually fully understand what is a toxic relationship. What is the definition of a toxic relationship? Can you tell us, Dee?
I think it's a really interesting point, because it may be different for everybody. And I don't know that I'm qualified to say what is toxic, because how we are and how we respond to things with individuals could have greater impact on one person than it does on another. And that's why we're more compatible with some people than we are with others, if that makes sense. But I think it's, if you are feeling that, as a result of being in a relationship, that your life's not better, or at least equal to how it would be without them, then it's probably not so good for you. And that was my benchmark when I came out of the relationship, is that I only want somebody in my life that's going to be equal to me or make my life even better. There's no point in having a close relationship with somebody that's going to make you feel worse or make your life worse, in my opinion. And I can only speak for myself. So I think toxic's different for different people, but having some few people that have found the book and spoken to me, it can be anybody from the long-term relationship you're in. It can be with a friend, or a so-called friend. It could be with a parent, it could be with a relative. So there's it's I think it's subjective, really. It's about what it means for people. It's probably not a very helpful definition, but
I think it is. I mean, the whole time I'm listening to you, I'm sort of thinking, only because I've done the work on myself, understanding what my own values are. I think values are a great foundation on which you can start to decide, actually, is something toxic to you? Do you have substantial boundaries around yourself, which means that you're aware of what your boundaries are, and so are other people. But if people keep infiltrating your boundaries, despite you stating them, then that, to me, starts a level of toxicity. I remember watching Carol Vorderman, actually, when she was on the reality program Celebrities in the Jungle, and she talked about, that toxicity, about a circle around yourself, which is your boundary. And if people keep coming and trying to encroach on your boundaries, that's, the whole gaslighting thing, toxicity. And then what happens is your circle just gets even smaller, and it's like able to be infiltrated. And I thought that was really, really useful. And you're right. I mean, that can happen on any level. If we're in relationships with people, superficial, intimate relationships, and everything in between, some for small pockets of our lifetime or some for long-lasting relationships, I think it can pop up anywhere, can't it? And the reason I was so keen to talk to you about this in the context of menopause and midlife is there's a certain irony, which is most people report to me, women and men, that actually it's their relationships that are struggling most. Now, that's not a symptom of menopause, but it is actually a byproduct of menopause, in that actually people start to feel more vulnerable, more anxious, more insecure, and they start to actually question who they are as people. So if you have been in a long-term relationship, but you now feel very different, like you feel like a totally different version of yourself 20 years ago, there's going to be a little bit of friction there, isn't there? So tell us a little bit more about the flow of the book, if you don't mind. I mean, have you've got a copy there, just so you can show it to us? Blatant shameless plug, why not? There we go, lovely. And so there's an open door vista into something else. So so what is it about? How does the book flow?
Yeah, so the book flows in a way, for me, I'm quite logical and analytical in my thinking. So I'm somebody that is really helped by some structure. And I think structure is really important when you've come out of that kind of chaotic and emotional place to, I think we all kind of need a stake in the ground to say, right, this is what we can hang on to. This is really important. So we've got something to hang on to, some structure. So I set it out in some logical steps to create some structure. And it gives us the unconscious sense then of moving forward incrementally, because we're talking about small steps as we go through. So the first step really is taking stock. It's assessing where we are in our own mental health and well-being, what resources we have around us, focusing some of our, our strengths and skills, because we often come out of toxic relationships with a very worn down sense of confidence, and our assertiveness might be low, and that sort of links with you talking about your boundaries. Sometimes it's really hard to keep up those boundaries when you've lost a sense of self and your confidence and self-esteem is very low. So taking stock is kind of where we start, just to really help people assess where you are. And then we look at how our brain can help us, because it's such a powerful tool and we don't make the most of it. And we're not taught this stuff. You talked about values, and that's so important. That is your guiding compass through life. That if your decision making is on your values, your well-being, your thriving, your sense of purpose and place in the world is so much better. And if you don't know that, and you marry somebody with completely opposite values to you because you're ignorant of it, that can create massive tensions, but it's such a life skill that we're not made aware of. So we look at how our brain can help us and how it gets in the way, how it's created the space we're kind of in, if you like, the power of language. And then part of the book is understanding your values, that really important guiding compass, and the beliefs we hold, because whatever we believe, we will find evidence for. So we need to make sure that's what we're believing is actually really helpful to us, because we will have been given beliefs. My beliefs were I was fat, thick and ugly. That was my belief set as I was growing up. And so I had to really challenge that in order to become something different. It takes effort, but it can be done. And then building your confidence and assertiveness as you go through. And then at that stage, you're really looking at designing your new future. And setting goals sounds a bit of a cliche, but having a plan to work towards, you're far more likely to get somewhere that's good and that you want to be, rather than not having a plan at all, in my thinking.
Definitely.
So it's a bit like being a ship on an ocean. If you're happy to bob around and end up where you end up, it's no issue. But actually, if there's an island you like to reach, at least set a course for it. And the journey's not going to be easy. Good sailors weren't made on calm seas. There's a lovely quote, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you have a sense of direction and purpose of where you're going. So you're far more likely to end up in a happier place. So that's sort of designing your future and setting your goals. And I can honestly say, genuinely hand on heart, that if I hadn't learned what I've learned, I wouldn't be where I am today. If I kept believing that I was fat, thick and ugly, and I'd never challenged that, I wouldn't be sat here with an MSc, a published book, a wonderful life, a beautiful family, a good husband, so it can happen. And I so want to give that message to anybody out there that's struggling or at the very beginning of that journey.
Yes, I absolutely love all of that, because actually I think what most people don't realise is the quiet conversations they're having with themselves are so damaging, aren't they? Because we've been past those scripts, like you said. I mean, equally, I've been past a lot of those scripts, and I didn't realize until quite recently you can actually put them down if you want to, and replace them with something much more positive. And so this is really powerful, because actually how we think of ourselves is huge in that manifestation, isn't it? You know, we were saying actually before, you told me that little anecdote which you could share on here, which we were talking about actually the impact of toxicity, and you were saying something about blood pressure, weren't you? Tell the listeners what you were saying about that.
Utterly amazing, because I'm getting more into, you know, we've always had these old sayings, you know, be focus, you know, be careful what you wish for and things like this, without recognizing the neuroscience behind what's happening in our brain. And now I've had a menopause moment. Go back to your question.
Yeah. So it was basically showing the impact. You know, we were talking about suppressing stuff, weren't we?
So there's a chap that's written a book called Your Brain at Work, David Rock, absolutely phenomenal chap. And there's research. He quotes research about stating that if we're suppressing our own emotion, which is a really unhealthy thing to do. So I work with people about their performance and managing emotion in the workplace, because that's really important in order to continue to be effective. But if we start to suppress our own emotion, not only does that impact our own body with our blood pressure rising because our body is struggling with that, the research has shown it actually puts the blood pressure up in the person witnessing it unconsciously, which is just amazing, isn't it? Isn't that phenomenal? So we're not only impacting our own health, we're impacting other people's that we're close to.
And you know, and that is really obvious to me. I would consider myself to be an empath. You know, I feel and absorb the energy of any room I go into, and I'm on highest alert when I spot the person whose energy is bottoming out. You know, it's just like that for me. But I would say exactly that. You know, we talk about people who can be energy vampires or mood hoovers, can't we? So we have an awareness that there is an effect, but certainly I didn't even realize that that's how profound it can be. I mean, I guess we're all transmitting, aren't we? I always say to my clients, we're transmitting and receiving information all the time, consciously, unconsciously. But to know that we're actually reacting to it then it brings it into this whole important realm of, if we are surrounding ourselves with people who are toxic to us, there's a toxicity to our body, isn't there? Definitely.
You know, absolutely taking the words out of my mouth, and I'm fascinated by this, and I'm not a scientist, but quantum physics is somewhere in amongst this, because apparently, you know, our bodies have an energy level, and every atom in our body that makes up our body vibrates at a certain level of energy, and atoms are shown to attract like for like. So depending on our mood and our energy, we like for like attract others within that sphere. So you'll know yourself, if you want to be cheered up, you need somebody with a strong, cheerful personality to pull you back out up to their level of energy, than having other people around you that are going to bring you down. So it's hugely important thinking about who's around us and how do they impact us, because it affects us. It absolutely does affect us.
And I think this is probably even more profound in the workplace, isn't it, Dee? Because what's your, I mean, this isn't something, this is what I told you would happen. I'll ask you another question that I don't know where it's coming from. But on some level, people in work how are they coping with that? Are they masking? What are people doing rather than dealing with this toxicity? Because they probably don't even know that it's toxic to them, but they're just soldiering on. What are people doing to mask it, do you think, in work, for example?
It's a really good question, and it's quite, you know, it goes into systemic thinking around organizational trauma, if you like, and there's not a lot of research that's been done on that at the moment, but they are looking into it, because, you know, all I can say, people are now, especially say for the NHS, you know, it's been under extreme stress and gone through extreme trauma, and everybody's, you know, tired and has been impacted. The way to turn that around is be the change we want to see as an individual. That's the power we have as an individual. So if we're in a toxic, what we see as a toxic, you know, arena or organization, it takes effort to push back against that other energy, but be the change you want to see, because that will increase your own resilience. you know, I could go off into a whole 4-day interview about resilience.
Yeah.
But yes, it does happen. It does happen. And if the thinking tank is all in the same water, it's very difficult to see past that. So all I can suggest to anybody is be the change you want to see. That's your power.
Yeah. And and your book, I mean, I know this, but your book is like how to do that, isn't it? Your book is how to do that. And it's so, I mean, I resonate with all of it because, you know, huge amounts of NLP in there, and just really like, you know, common sense as well. But actually, it's not so common. That's the point. It's not so common, and actually, there's a way through it. I mean, what would you say if I can ask you, having had a lived experience of a toxic relationship, what's the point at which you realised you needed to do something else? What's the point? Or and how do you springboard from that point? Because I'm imagining it must be so exhausting. How do you springboard from that?
Yeah, I think again, for other people, everybody will be different and have a different thing, but I had to set myself a bottom line. And I'd also like to say, as hard as it was, but actually that person taught me more about myself than I would ever have known otherwise. So in terms of a positive,
Yes.
you know, there were elements of me within that relationship that allowed things to happen because I hadn't shored up my own bridges, you know. So for me, I created very hard to be objective when you're in it and think, what point is this okay? Is this not okay? Am I in a domestically abusive relationship? Aren't I? You know, you couldn't get a sense of it. I was too in the soup to try and understand it. But it's so ridiculous now when I look back. But I had to have a bottom line. And so I made sure I had that bottom line because I knew externally that was not okay. And once that bottom line had finally got to that point for me, that was my trigger, as painful as it was, because there's other people involved, that I had to make that decision.
Yeah.
And it was not just impacting me. I could cope with the impacting me, couldn't cope with it impacting others.
Yeah, and that's where this whole thing about how your brain can help, the power of your language, almost really coming back to yourself, isn't it? To sort of redefine yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's so wonderful. I've gone off piste, as I said I would. So the link, we know that, you know, so if we think of now 2023, we both have children, and we think about how the relationship landscape looks now on a more personal level. I mean, back in the day, I'm going to sound really old now, back in the day you met people at nightclubs, didn't you? Or they were part of your friendship circle or whatever. Now it's a totally different landscape, isn't it? With social media, dating apps, all of these sorts of things. I mean, what are your thoughts about relationships in 2023? I mean, what are the things that are great about forging relationships? What are the pitfalls? Because actually we could so easily get into a toxic relationship now.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's such a hard question, isn't it? Because I'm not 20 anymore.
Really?
No, I know.
Oh my gosh, newsflash.
Stay over 20.
I know. I was going to say the same thing myself.
I think it's really hard. I think it's really hard, actually, because, you know, there seems to be a very different reality that young people think exists away from what I see as a reality. And then there's a mismatch, you know, there's an incongruence with who they are and what they're thinking and feeling and what they think they should be and thinking and feeling. And I think that's a really difficult, you know, you're at a very vulnerable age when you're growing up as a teenager to influence, and you haven't quite grown into your own self yet because you're still finding out who that is. And when there's so much influence telling you things, it must be very hard to maintain a sense of self because you're trying to find out who that is through that very space and time. So I think building your own self-awareness and knowing yourself is key to navigating any challenge, whether it's a new relationship or whatever it is, because, you know, what triggers certain behaviors in yourself? How do you take care of yourself? You know, understanding yourself and your values, trying to recognize what's real for you in your reality and what isn't real. I mean, I see so many young, beautiful women and men struggling with how they look, trying to create something that they think is what people need and want. And I was lucky enough to have a granddad to say, "You're beautiful, maid, you don't need any makeup," and I hated him for it at the time, but I see where he was coming from now. And I think, yeah, it's very difficult for young people to, I don't really know what the answer was really in that respect, but I think the more you can know yourself and have people around you that can reflect back to you how beautiful you are inside, it's not about the outside. It's such a cliche, that giving you that strong sense of self and that you're okay, and that actually it's quite a false, superficial world that you're linking into, because everybody's scared to show vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with all of that. I'm a big fan of Gogglebox. That's how I catch up on my TV. And I was watching the celebrity version last night. And there's a new drama series called Fake Profile. And it's that whole thing, isn't it? So much of who we are is curated on social media through filters, through a curated lens. But the reality is our body would give us signals, wouldn't it? In that way that you just talked about energy, because everything's through a screen, and actually my understanding is largely that people, in terms of sort of establishing relationships, it's through text, it's through messenger service, more so than through interacting together in the same environmental space. And so that creates this illusion. There's a veil to it all, which means actually we're relying on one sense. And as you and I know in NLP, there's more than one sense. So we're looking at just that visual element. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think this sort of stuff should be taught in schools. Yeah. This should be part of PSHE for young people, so that people can start to establish their worth before they pick up their phone. Your worth is not curated by your phone, so that actually you can show up. I mean, I did my daughter's purpose in life with her quite recently. She just wants to have fun and adventure. I mean, God, I wish I'd known that when I was 17. Because I think I probably would have surrounded myself with slightly different people. But I think that is probably the best advice that you're giving, which is actually, if like the book says, knowing how your brain can help you, but also if you don't understand how your brain can help you, you're relying on external stuff, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
The fuel is not coming internally enough, and you're right, it's those whole values. I often say to my daughter, why do you like these people as your friends? What is it you value about them? And that's very different to say, what do you like about them? How do they look? What do they do? Yeah. We need to get much deeper inside the psychology of it to really understand what we like about people and what do we like about ourselves. So I think that's absolutely right. So if you could give yourself one bit of advice in all this learning that you've done, retrospectively, hindsight, what a great thing, what advice would you package up and give to your younger self?
So I think you've just said it really, and the first thing I was thinking was you are a value. I didn't feel a value. I felt worthless. And I think even if you've had a good family life, you go, transitioning through that teenage stage, you can question that about yourself. And I think that's why it's so dangerous in the world now of social media, because if you're in that space, there's a lot of bad influence out there which isn't going to help you. So my message to my younger self is you are of value, and you're of more value than you realize. And the other message on that I've learned, and if you don't take anything away else from this interview apart from this, for anybody out there in the whole world, this is what you need to take away, okay? And that is focus on what you do want, okay? 80% of people focus on what they don't want all of the time, and our brain works away tirelessly to achieve what we're thinking about most, and it doesn't have a differentiation between negative and positive. So please think of the positive, because we get distracted, we get taken off track. The real chances of success are bringing your brain and your thinking back to, actually, I've gone off again, think about what I don't want. What is it I do want? Keep that focus, keep focusing on that, and that will create more of it. That's my
I love that. I love that. And it resonates with when I'm working with my clients, I say to people all the time, you know, when you think about that great film, The Wizard of Oz, you know, that could have been cut down to 20 minutes if Dorothy had just stayed on her yellow brick road. You know, she wouldn't have got into all that drama. But actually it also celebrates life is life, and we will step off our path sometimes, and we'll meet amazing characters like the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Lion, you know.
They'll teach us something.
Yeah, and they'll teach us something, but as always, as much as you can, always keep your path in line of sight, so that actually you can get back on it. You've got the tools to do that. And you're absolutely right. You know, we do, out of fear, I think we focus on what we don't want, you know, because again, that's been handed down to us, isn't it? You know, be a good girl because you don't want to be a bad girl. You know, it's all of these sorts of narratives, isn't it, that are so unhelpful, that we just they're pinned on us like badges, and we don't realize. And then we look down and we go, oh, okay, I'm a good girl, right? So I need to be a good girl. What does a good girl, you know, it's all of these sorts of unhelpful things, isn't it?
Absolutely. And being perfect, you know, young people trying to be perfect over and above, you know, it's such a hard path to follow, isn't it? But I think I love the analogy of the yellow brick road. I think that's absolutely fantastic.
One of my favorite films ever, mostly because she had those amazing red shoes. Just saying.
Absolutely.
I just like, but I do think it's a great still. I mean, it stood the test of time, that film, and the glorious Technicolor, which is what life is about. It's that glorious Technicolor, but actually it can be very grey in parts. And sort of talking about people in menopause, I do think this is one of the biggest energy drainers on people, because we're juggling things, aren't we? We're you know, with that sandwich generation, we're looking after elderly relatives, probably, you know, we've still got children at home. You know, we probably had scarce identity about who we were as people before all of that, and now the anxiety that can tend to come with menopause due to a lack of progesterone makes us question everything. And this is why divorce is at its highest. It peaks right around the same time as the average menopause for people, which is about 51. So, you know, this is pre-work, isn't it, really? You know, this is not, you know, it's not what we're saying is that it can all be okay. But actually, like most things in life, if we had the knowledge much earlier in our lifetime, it would serve us so much better right now, because so many people just don't have the energy, do they? But what I love about your book is that it's going to help people who recognize, like you said, right, there's my boundary, there's my bottom line, and I'm approaching it. So now I'm definitely doing something about that, or before, really. So anything that I haven't asked you in relation to the book that might be helpful to anybody listening?
Oh, bless you. I think, you know, for anybody that wants to think about, actually, could I design my life a bit better to have more of what I want? Just take the first part of the title, you know, creating your future. You don't have to have had a toxic relationship, because all the tools in the book will work for you regardless, I guess, is kind of. So hopefully, you know, we all need to be in the right place at the right time for these things, don't we? And talking about, you know, menopause, if the book can help us get into the right frame of mind before we hit menopause, then we know which part the menopause is. I think that's the difficulty, is because it creates an added layer of confusion in our thinking, you know. So is it actually our relationship's bad, or is it that our hormones and the menopause are making us ratty, frustrated, you know, all these things? So therefore it's going to create a crack in our relationship, which could have been perfectly well if we'd understood all this about ourselves before we got to that point. And I think, you know, a lot of my coaching is with people that are hitting midlife and became a doctor because their parents were doctors, but actually they'd much rather be a gardener, you know. Or they're getting to the stage of their life where their kids are grown up, so the relationship has been safe because they've wanted to be in the relationship to get the kids grown up, but actually now they can review their life. Is the relationship still as important? Because actually the focus was on the children. But with the menopause in that mix as well, everything becomes very confusing for people. So I think if the book can help people before they get to that place create a better, stronger sense of self and what's right for them, then they can work through the menopause knowing that it's the menopause and what, you know, what the symptoms are that brings, what the challenges are that we might need to face and work through in our own mind. But it's actually nothing to do with the relationship. It's about us. I think, does that make sense?
That is, honestly, that's textbook for me, because yes, it's all of that, and in reverse as well, that actually the cracks might have been there anyway, but you've just been papering over them for 15-20 years, and now it's actually you just don't have the bandwidth to do that anymore. You've down tools on it, and then that's when it really flares up. So I totally agree with you. I think this is a toolkit for life, because we all interact with other people, and interacting with another person constitutes a relationship. So it is totally important. I, for one, will definitely be advocating your book in my menopause webinars with my corporate clients, particularly when we get to those section about relationship. We do whole sessions around relationships, in work, out of work. And so this is fundamental, absolutely. So I definitely align with you completely on that. I always like to know a little bit more about my guests as well. And I challenged Dee. I said, okay, right, let's imagine I'm obsessed with food and dinner parties. I just don't have enough time to hold as many as I would like. But I do them periodically throughout the year. But if you had a dinner party, which 3 guests, famous or not, would you be having at your dinner party, and why?
Okay, so this was really hard for me because one of my things in life is I don't like leaving people out.
Oh no. Well, we'll caveat it all by saying
yeah. So my first choice, and I will expand, but my first choice was my husband and my 2 boys, because my God, I am not happier in my life than when I'm with them and they're bouncing off each other, making each other laugh, and because they understand me. So that close bubble is just a beautiful place to be. So with that aside, the 3 guests I chose, do you want them all out first, or one
at a time? Big reveal. Go for it.
Okay, big reveal. So my first one was Socrates.
Oh, okay. Why was Socrates?
Just such an interesting and phenomenal thinker for his time, and I could learn so much from him. I would just want to sit and listen and contemplate and reflect and understand. It would just give me a lifetime's work just being in his company, I think.
Amazing.
That's the saddest thing, is there's not enough lives. I don't have enough lives. Now I've learned about life. I've so much that I'm interested in and want to. Anyway, so Socrates would be one of my guests. But it might have to be a personal dinner party just with each one.
Just you and him, a one-on-one. Yeah, definitely. There's no room for anybody else. Sorry.
The other one was so the next one was Winston Churchill.
Oh, okay.
Now there's a bit of transference in here because of my father, some of his traits, but I think that was a time when, and I might be wrong, and this is why I'd like to meet him, but a time when there was still some integrity in leaders' thinking, especially in politicians. And I'd be interested to see if he is the person that I've created in my mind from reading his biographies and trying to understand him a bit better, and his battle with depression and things like that. So I just think really, really interesting, actually, chap. So I'd be fascinated to spend an evening with him.
Yeah, wonderful. Because like you say, I mean, the image of the man, and certainly, what we read in books, see in films and things, you do just want to make sure, again, it's that whole values thing, isn't it? I'm putting my trust that actually you're the person I think you are. So yeah, it would be great to have a conversation. Do you have one question you want to ask him? If you could ask him one question.
I hadn't thought that far ahead.
No.
I
always like the idea of how we used to have such elaborate breakfasts in bed. Like I mean, well, if that's true at all, I would love to know more about his food, his appetite and stuff like that. But I would imagine it was very decadent, is what I would imagine.
I would think so. But what I loved about him was that he did take a nap in the afternoon. Now, managing energy in terms of our ability to process and create thinking, that is so important, and yet nobody does it. They do it in Europe, but nobody does it, and yet we're missing a trick there. you know.
Well, we absolutely are, which is great, because we're doing a talk at Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce, all about sleep. We've got a sleep expert coming in, and you're absolutely right. The brain will tell you there's a reason we have a post-lunch dip. It's probably because we need to just, apparently we go through sleep cycles every sort of 90 minutes and throughout the whole day and night. So actually it is natural that we might feel a little bit sleepy, but we just resist, don't we, the whole time. We're like, no, because there's that whole narrative about sleeping's for wimps and stuff, or napping's for wimps and that. But you're absolutely right. In Eastern cultures, part of the norm, isn't it? You go to places like Spain and that siestas, so they're onto something, aren't they?
They're onto something, definitely. Yeah, no.
And
totally.
and who's our third guest?
So the third guest is just the most phenomenal woman that I've ever come across. And I don't know if you've heard of her, Virginia Hall. Now,
No, remind me.
she was an American spy, and she basically helped win the war in World War II as part of the French resistance.
Wow.
There's a book written about her called A Woman of No Importance. And originally I picked up the book because the title resonated with me. That was how I always felt.
Yeah.
So but there's no comparison, obviously. But she's displayed unbelievable depths of strength, fortitude, tenacity, bravery, courage. I could go on. And she had an amputated leg, and she kept that hidden. She traveled mountains over snow with an amputated leg, and the pain that brought, for months to get to safety. She took phenomenal risks, and it's kind of that old school. There's a bit like, my grandmother was so tough. She was so tough as a woman, and again, it's not a comparison to Virginia Hall, but I think if there's ever a woman out there that wants to be inspired for courage and strength and what they're capable of, read that book. I mean, my God, what a woman. Yeah, I'm in total awe of her.
Wow, I love it. You've totally sold that to me. I've written that down. That's going on my Christmas list.
Unbelievable. Yeah, so she'd be my third guest. Yeah,
that is amazing, and that dovetails beautifully, which is actually, we might not all have the capacity to be a spy, but actually we all have the capacity to create our future, like you said. And that's why your book must definitely precede any other book, because actually it's great to have those lessons, isn't it? Even if we don't really need them right now, it's good to know how you can utilize those 8 chapters that you've talked about, because I think that would be a real game changer for people. And actually, if we have got children, largely how we show up in our own lives is a great lesson for them anyway. I definitely feel NLP came into my life at just the right time when I needed it.
Yeah.
And it has served me well ever since. So I would just like to say thank you so much. I'm, obviously a copy's coming my way with this book so that I can hold it up and say to people, midlife or wherever, actually, this is something that could be hugely valuable to you. So do you know what? Thank you so much for dropping that into what was a totally different conversation we were having one day, because it just really made me smile. So I know people will want to get hold of this, but how can people get hold of it, Dee? Is it available? Does it have an ISBN number that I can put in the show notes and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. It's on Amazon.
Okay.
And WH Smith's. I can give you an ISBN number or email that to you.
Yeah, that would be great, and I'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, published by Routledge. And I think, I mean, from a coaching perspective, I think the biggest message is that we can take self-responsibility, have courage, and no matter where you are, helping you to find a purpose in your life, doesn't matter how big or small, is the way forward.
Lovely. Finding your North Star.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's lovely. Well, Dee, thank you so much for your time. I know you're hugely in demand, and it's so lovely to have a fellow coach on this episode. But for now, I would like to say thank you, and we'll post this. And please be in touch with Dee. Do connect with her on LinkedIn. Do you have any other socials at all, Dee, or is that the best way?
Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and I think most of them are at SW Coaching. You can find us. somewhere on there, Southwest
Yeah.
Coast.
So if you can send those over to me, that would be brilliant. And I'll make sure those go in the show notes. But for now, thank you so much, Dee, and hope to chat to you again.
Can I just say a massive thank you to you and to all your audience, and yeah, just best of luck.
Thank you.